Welcome, everybody. I'm KP Reddy with Shadow Ventures, and I've got Mike Brewer here, COO of Radco, who I've gotten to know over the last several years. I think our first meeting was on a mountain in Arizona.
True statement.
True statement. We met on a mountain in Arizona. We're like, oh, you're from Atlanta too. This is interesting.
It was very cool.
So Mike, would love to, just for everybody else, just kind of a little bit of background on kind of your journey and what you do at Radco, and just for context.
Yeah, definitely. So I got into the multifamily space a long time ago. I think I'm approaching roughly my 30th year in the business. I actually started out on the single family sales side and quickly learned that I didn't like the feast and famine of that business, or building the farm and trying to harvest from it. So I got into property management. I started out as a leasing consultant. Fast forward to today, I'm the chief operating officer for Radco, the Radco companies, which is actually two companies, the Radco companies, and then the Radco residential side, which first side is an investment firm specializing in value add multifamily. We're actually pivoting right now and buying hotels. And then the other side of the business is Radco Residential, where we manage those multifamily assets, not the hotels. That's not something that we're going to try to do.
You don't want to run a hotel?
I don't think so. Not from all the horror stories that I've heard. So,
yeah. Well, I think one of the things that was super interesting when we first met is like a lot of your focus on like team and leadership and how you approach it, which, I've been part of a couple of large organizations, but, I think in your world, you not only have kind of executives in the office and that team, but you also have property managers and, the entire spectrum of all walks of life, so to speak. So how did you start getting kind of into thinking about like leadership? Because I know you talk a lot about it, and like, it feels like you're pretty deep into being a continual learner around leadership.
that is true. I think it'd be hard for me to cite the precise moment. I think it probably dates back to when I was selling single family homes, and I worked for a gentleman that I consider my mentor to this day. And he said something along the lines of leaders are readers. And I'm sure that's not exactly how he said it, but I really latched on to that and started to dive deep into leadership literature. And yes, that is a real bookcase back there. And yes, I go deep on the topic of leadership. And I think over the years, I really bought into some of the deeper philosophies of, say, the Peter Druckers of the world and the Tom Peters of the world, and certainly a lot of others. But I bought into the idea very early on that the philosophy of team members first, and that businesses exist to serve the people that serve it. In other words, if you do a really good job of serving team members and serving them first, then by extension, or maybe even by default in some cases, they'll actually take care of your customer and your business partners and ultimately your investors. So that's how I got into it, and I've seen it play out over a long bit of time in the way of real practical results as a result of focusing on team members first.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you read business books, and you've got a bookshelf of books back there, it seems like a pattern starts to emerge. Like, I mean, sometimes I see these new books come out and I'm like, oh, that guy just knocked off Drucker. Like he used right. Different words, but just kind of knocked off Drucker. It seems like there's a lot of derivative work kind of in that space. Are there any new books that you've read or been exposed to that you're like, hey, this is actually pretty good? This isn't just derivative work.
Yeah, I would. I was just sharing this book today with another person from startup to grown up. And it's Allison Cohn. What strikes me about her is that she's my imagination tells me that she's a type A personality, straight shooter. If I were sitting in a room with her, she'd probably call my nonsense pretty quickly. And she's not cliche. A lot of the narrative in her book is really targeted around what I'd consider character development, deep work, probably things you'd chase back to religious literature, if you really got down to the essence of it all. So I think that that book and the fact that it's geared more toward character development and inner work is really, I guess, refreshing in a sense, because a lot of the literature that I've read back here is more external, or catalysts that come from the environment that give cause for you to do things. And it completely avoids the idea and the fact that sometimes you just need to go deep inside. You need to look yourself in the mirror and get over your own nonsense before you can actually get started in leading other people.
Yeah. It was interesting. I was listening to a podcast actually just last night about deep work and talking about just like the time management aspect. And they talk about like who should be doing deep work. And the author of this book, he's a computer science professor who wrote this book, and he blocks out his day and leaves himself. And he gives all these great, Mark Twain used to go hide out in a cabin with no running water and write. And J.K. Rowling's like hid somewhere in Scotland to write. And they were talking about all these creatives that do all this deep work. And it was pretty interesting. But, you know, when asked like who shouldn't be doing deep work, and the guy said CEOs.
Interesting.
The CEOs shouldn't be doing deep work. It's actually kind of contrary to their job function, and that everyone around them should be doing deep work. And I was pretty surprised by that.
Yeah, I would. That sounds like, so I read a book called Range, and then I think some of Cal Newport's work speaks to those topics. And I guess I could understand that a CEO needs to be broad in nature and not so deep or narrow or pointy. I think as it relates to what might be coming to you in the way of the environment, but I do think there's an argument to be made for, if I'm a CEO of bad character and I am the face of the company, and human nature suggests that they're going to follow you and they're going to act like you. I won't name them, but you can certainly probably think of some CEOs that you've seen in the press that went off the rails, and their company by default went off the rails. So when it comes to that deep work, I think you have to do it if you're the CEO, if we're talking about character. But if we're talking about the business environment, I would buy into that.
Yeah.
You got to be.
It's almost like you're a problem solver, traffic cop kind of thing. It's interesting you talk about like character. I mean, I don't know if you saw yesterday, the entire Activision, the video game company, the entire company walked out and said they would not go back till the CEO got changed.
Oh, wow. I saw the headline. I didn't know that punchline. That's a great testament.
Yeah. Because a lot of people don't realize, like in the creative business, like video game development, those folks work all kinds of hours. And they're thriving for this like perfection in product. They get paid a base salary and very, very low. They don't get paid that well. People think like, oh, I want to be a video game designer. And it's like, oh, you want to make $30,000 a year living in LA, like, and be 40 years old and have 3 roommates. If that's what you want, like, go sign up. But there's this like whole faction within the video game industry where a lot of these folks, they just want Activision on their resume, but a lot of them have really gotten to where it's the way they treat people in terms of labor and pay and all that. And people are just so into it, right? They're just so passionate about it that it's pretty fascinating. But they finally decided like, hey, enough's enough.
It's interesting. I think that I was reading something, and I won't be able to cite the source of this, so I certainly fact check me, but where the youth in our world today are getting back to, I hate to use the word of more of a balanced lifestyle, but they're not buying into this idea that I'm going to work to live, or live to work rather. I want to be in an environment that's going to challenge me as a person. I want to have experiences that are going to grow me. And I want to be comped for that, right? No longer do I want to see, it sounds cliche, but no longer do I want to see the man making all of the wealth and all of the money. I want to share in that because I'm back here producing the content that is creating that platform for the wealth and wealth creation. And I just think our youth is they're not moving in that direction anymore. They're moving contrary to that.
Mm-hmm. No, I think there's definitely like I think that we have a generation that is actualizing on all the things that we told ourselves. we right? We're like, oh yeah, we want work-life balance. Like we would say all the words,
That's right.
but then act very differently. Act very differently. And I think there's definitely like no, I actually want to execute on the things that you've been talking about, like your generation's been talking about. And I think it's interesting, you're seeing it now with I don't know how it has been like hiring in your world. We're small and venture capital is very glamorous. So I have about 15 people in my inbox every day that want to come work for free. I mean, it's a different world, but everyone else I'm talking to is just like hiring is out of this world. And, the employment data is one thing, but like feeling it, when you walk into a friend of mine's in the restaurant business and it's turned into like, counter service, like every restaurant's turned into a counter service, like seat yourself, hit the QR code and go pick your food up at the counter. And so, I mean, I'm assuming, have y'all been seeing that on the hiring side as well?
Yeah, it's especially on the service side of our business, or otherwise known as the maintenance side of our business. And certainly what I'm about to say is more anecdotal in nature, not so much deep research, but I believe that we've seen this world where call it YouTube, call it Instagram, call it influence marketing, whatever, people are looking at the lifestyle, and much of that is a facade, I believe, but they're looking at lifestyles like that and they're thinking to themselves, I don't want to plunge a toilet. I don't want to unclog a sink. I want to go make YouTube videos and other things and potentially make a run at striking it rich, right? And so I think that's one component. I certainly think that having experienced COVID now, and certainly the right interventions from a government level have produced a sort of a sideline effect for some people. And that it's not a political statement, but I certainly think it's a reality. I think that as some of those things burn off, people will start to realize that I actually have to make some money to live, or if they've migrated into sort of doubling up and tripling up and or moving back home, they'll realize they don't like that so much, so have to get back out into the workforce. But yes, to answer your question, it's been a huge challenge for us, and not just our company, but broadly speaking in the multifamily space on the service side, especially.
Yeah. Do you think? So I'm a big believer is the market like will reshape itself, right? So what that means is some restaurants will close, and it just like we will. I kind of joke around with my friends. It's like, how many craft burger restaurants do we need?
That's right.
There's 10 within my house. Like I don't need another way to get a burger. So maybe we don't need 10 of them. Maybe it's just, we only need one of them. And that, we need some creative destruction, so to speak. And then also like, I know you and I have talked about like robotics and automation, that there's always been like, well, we don't want to put people out of jobs. And then, will the resident kind of get it, right? Will a resident get the idea of a maintenance robot coming by or something like that? Or will they, but now you kind of say like, of course the resident will understand that. They'd rather have a maintenance robot than no maintenance, right? And you're not taking a job away from anyone. And so I'm pretty bullish on the market will figure itself out. And people that have left the workforce thinking like there's always going to be a job for me might find out that there isn't one, right? There isn't one.
I believe that to be true. And I think to sort of piggyback on the first remark that you made, I think that consumer base that we are serving today is certainly being shaped by the Amazons and the Apples and the Googles of the world. So when you show up with some sort of technology or you try to introduce a new technology, they're already primed, right? And some of them are expecting it. And if you're not doing it, they're complaining about it. So I certainly think that's at play. And I do think, to speak to your second point, or sort of maybe take an off ramp, I think companies, no matter what industry you're in today, it is incumbent upon you to start upskilling and reskilling your workforce and being in service of them, understanding that you might be putting a technology in place that will put them out of a job. Mm-hmm. So it's important that you're helping them sort of transition into gaining a skill that will make them marketable in another industry or another company or whatever it is. That's, in my head, that's your job right now.
Yeah. But it's also interesting though, like the reskilling, right? The minute the reskilling turns into you need to learn how to write code. And they're like, well, I'm terrible at math, right? Like all of a sudden, like the skills are, if the fundamentals aren't there. And honestly, like, I don't think you have to be good at math to write code. I think you just have to have a willingness to learn, right? And I think there's a level of intimidation that people undergo. They're like, I can't write code. Are you kidding me? And so I think that transitional effect of how you think about reskilling folks, I think everybody with given enough time and resources, which not all companies have the time and resources, can learn just about anything, right? It's just, if they want to. But if so many people opt out, like I'm not good at math, I'm not going to write code. That's like, then what? Then what's the option?
I think you raise a really interesting point, and my retort to that would be this: I think that at least my head tells me that the future will be full of creative work or soft skill type work. So I don't know much about what I'm about to say, except that I've read a few papers about no code software, right? So at some point, AI machine learning is behind the scenes creating the code. And my job today is to drag and drop or to create the framework or the concept of what I'm trying to achieve in way of a path or a process or a routine or whatever in my business. And so maybe my reskilling is simply using the creative mind to think through a workflow where I drag and drop some AI authored, right, software. And then I've become valuable to my company because I'm automating workflow without knowing how to actually write code, right? So I think that's out there. But I also think on the soft skill side, the thing that comes most readily to mind is conflict in our world is never going to go away. And so a person who becomes very adept at conflict resolution, right, whatever the business might be, will certainly have a place in our world for a long bit of time.
Yeah, when the robot fails,
right,
and the customer still has a problem, it will be escalated to a human, and that human needs to know how to deal with it, right?
I think so.
Yeah. No, I do think it. I just went on my first work trip last week, so I've avoided airplanes for almost 2 years, and it was fast. It was a little bit like, oh my gosh, the world has changed, right? Going through security and checking into hotels. And I went to it was a conference at a hotel resort that had 5 restaurants and only one was open. And I was like, wow, okay, I have to eat at the same place 3 meals a day for the next 3 days. And so when I asked them about it, they're like, well, just can't find the staff, and we're just our food supply, we're trying to figure it all out. We were stocking too much stuff, and just all the issues that people are, if the industry's gone through a reboot, it's failing to boot up for some people. They're having to hit reboot again and figure it out. But one of the interesting things I've been noticing, we talk about the inflationary environment, and we can argue whether inflation is transient or there's some permanence to it. But you go into a hotel and you pay $17 for a hamburger, and it's not a $17 hamburger.
No.
And there's one server serving 20 tables. So it's like, get up and top off your own water, right? It's like, right. So even if you look at the pricing, inflation around pricing, the lack of service, there's actually more, I think there's more inflation in the underservice of a customer these days than actually the price of the product or service.
I think that is true. And what makes me nervous about that particular statement, that fact in the world, is it's going to accelerate the pace of um, robotics in that type of service environment, right? In doing away with we all love DIY, right? We all love that. And we've loved it so much now. We're going to love it right into existence, and we're going to love ourselves right out of jobs. And so I think that experience is going to be picked up by robotics much quicker and much faster than others. You've probably seen it. You've been exposed to things like that, be it in the coffee shop or in the chain restaurant, or certainly I think luxury dining is not necessarily immune to that either. So it's scary, but it's coming if it's not already here in some places.
Yeah. No, I just bought like 3 Roombas for my house because I was like, they're $300. Why wouldn't I? Like, why wouldn't I? Right. And if it can cut down on someone coming by the house to clean up. And then I started thinking about, I was like, why couldn't you put a Roomba in every hotel room? They're $300. And I don't think guests would care. They would actually hit the clean button for you. You know, they don't care.
No, I mean, you've been trained to not put your towels out for service every night, right? You've been it's a great reason why, but you've been trained to do it. And so why wouldn't you press clean on the Roomba?
Yeah. And now they want you to make your own bed at the hotel too.
And make sure you put those pillows in the right.
What do you think? Like, you know, I look at it and say, like, what do you tell your kids, right? What do you tell, you know, the 20-something-year-olds are baked, right? What do you tell the 15-year-olds that are pretty self-sufficient on using automation? They don't care. And like what they should be thinking about, like career-wise.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I'm not asking my 15-year-old how to think about the world, I certainly would give them some advice. So I have a 16-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old son. And my daughter is probably more versed in the arts of creativity. She's a very talented dancer, picked up her first professional gig just a couple of days ago. And so I think that the way she looks at the world is not with any type of anxiety. It's more with this sort of expectant, something is going to come my way. And when it does, I will latch onto it and I will just express myself through it until that next thing comes along. It's almost like I'm not going into the work world expecting to be in one place for a very long bit of time. I'm going to go there, I'm going to get an experience, and then I'm going to go to the next place to get another experience, et cetera, et cetera. And as much as I try to suggest that, hey, look, there are some fundamental things that you need to have in your repertoire before you do that, it doesn't seem to really resonate with her. My son, on the other hand, is more hands-on. He likes to work with his hands. In my advice to him is, hey, look, there is a very underserved piece of this world in what Mike Rowe talks about all the time, right? Those tough jobs, dirty jobs, I think is what he really promotes. But that world of welding and concrete and plumbing and other things that make up the infrastructure of our world, I don't think those things are going away very soon. So my son, who likes to work with his hands, I'm advising him to run after those trades because I don't think those are going away anytime soon. My daughter, I'm just, I think in part, I'm hoping, maybe against all hope, that she finds a place where she can express herself, kind of hopping around until that thing presents itself that she can certainly thrive at.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know my own kids, they're a little bit older, they're 20 and 19. They have, maybe it's through having worked for me since they were 10, but they have really disconnected money from career.
Ooh.
They are very comfortable trading in the market, doing options trading. They're very savvy at investing. And they've done very well. I mean, of course, everybody's doing well in this market, but they've
True.
beaten the market, so to speak. And they think that's a totally different activity than what they do for work and what they do for their career. So when my youngest one says something like that, I want to be a doctor, I know I'm not going to make that much money as a doctor. I'm going to have to find another way to make a living. And I'm like, okay, what are your expectations of making a living? But okay. But it's funny, they've kind of disconnected, wages and earning versus their career, because they've decided there's so many other methods to make money than just working for somebody.
I think that is so true. It brings to mind a story I heard. I think I was listening to the Wall Street Journal podcast, and they were speaking to the fact that many youth in America, or young people, I'm getting old, so I refer to everybody as young now, but taking over their own financial advisement, right? They don't go to the big shops and get a financial advisor anymore. They govern their entire financial life themselves, to include the equity trading and things of that nature. And they have these sort of, I'm going to call them gig jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And so they go out and create content or stuff or things or NFTs, right? And they put those things out into the world, and that's how they create their wealth. Mm-hmm. They keep ownership and license of those things that they create and put them out into the world, and that's how they create wealth.
Yeah. No, it's definitely become very disjointed. And I think, to a certain degree, like if you look at the NFT market, it'll cycle through, right? I kind of view NFTs as like the baby beanie, the beanie baby thing, right? Like it'll run its cycle and then it'll come back in the form of something else, right? It'll be some other collectible, but it's interesting how the options in front of them. I mean, I have a nephew that has a Robinhood account, mm-hmm. and he sits there and trades all day. And he's finally gotten to the point where he makes more trading than he does in his day job. But the funny thing is, he doesn't think about quitting his day job, because he's like, I can do it on my lunch break. Like, it's on my phone. Like, I don't have to not work. He was kind of like, if I didn't work and just traded all day, I may not be that effective.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The basically having to go to having work hours that fill in between trading hours, forces him to be more disciplined.
Interesting.
Almost like I would be more fidgety trading if that's all I did all day. And I was like, that's interesting. Cause I was like, you sure you don't want to quit your job? He's like, why? Like, one has nothing to do with the other. He's like, some people are posting on Facebook during the middle of the workday. I'm doing trades. He's like, it works out.
I could, it's interesting. I don't know if there's a correlation here, but I often think that when you have tight constraints and disciplines around things, you oftentimes are better at those things than to sort of your implied point there. If he had all day to sit around and think about what trades he might make, right? Exactly. He might not make good trades. It might be that built-in constraint that is creating the upside for him.
Yeah. This podcast I listened to on Deep Work, they were talking about the creative culture, like artists and writers and video, all the people in the creative culture, how they actually manage their time like accountants. That while that is the only way to be successful as a creative, and this guy studied all this, is that if you're a painter, you don't paint infinitely. You say, I'm going to get this done between this time and that time, and then I'm going to go do something else. But they actually, the most successful artists actually track their time. I think the saying is they track their time better than accountants, which I found that as being pretty interesting. The idea of I need to put some time constraints on my work, because otherwise I could work on it forever.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that also in the authoring world. Ryan Holiday comes to mind, and he has a very disciplined routine with regard to the content that he produces, whether it be articles for blogs or the actual books that he produces. So it's 7 o'clock in the morning until roughly 9:30, 10 o'clock. And then the rest of the day is more about thinking time and clearing the thoughts to prepare for the next cycle of being in that disciplined, constrained space. And so I kind of liken that to allotting his time with an accounting method behind it.
Yeah. No, it's pretty fascinating because we all think like, oh, just, people go into a music studio and just like jam and come up with something. And there's a lot more, the ones that are successful, there's a lot more discipline to how they approach it.
I believe that word that you just said, I mean, I have to think or believe in my heart of hearts, even your business, they're the people that are really disciplined. They find out what the principles are, first principle things, whatever the principles are for whatever it is you're doing. And you just get real deep into discipline as it relates to those principles. And you understand that that's probably pretty boring, right? But if you stick to it and you do it long enough, I don't know how true the 10,000 hour rule is, but if you do it long enough, it will express itself in the way of fruit, right? Mm-hmm. It'll yield something good for you.
Yeah. And it's interesting you brought up first principles. Like I've been hearing that a lot, all of a sudden a lot, right? It's not a new idea, but you're hearing it a lot. And I think that there is a trend right now where if you think about like marketing, people have all these acronyms and ideas. And it's like, no, the first principles of marketing are, was it price, product, position? Like it's the basics, right? Promotion, 4 Ps or whatever, right?
You got it.
That's first principles. There's nothing else. And, people are busy like looking at all these other data sets, right? Like drip marketing and, what's happening. And it's like, if you break all that down to first principles, like maybe you're getting, distracted by these new terms, but go back to first principles and you kind of get there. And I think it's interesting. I'm hearing that a lot, which tells me like maybe people are saying, you know what, like we've made up this, to use a popular term, we've made up this like metaverse of like how we do business. We have all these metrics and OKRs. I listened to this podcast the other day about OKRs, and someone was like, Google wasn't, because the whole OKR book by John Doerr is about, he talks about Google. Yep. And, and someone's made the point like, Google was going to be successful despite OKRs.
That's right.
OKRs are terrible. Like it's a made up thing. And, it's like this causality. It's like, oh, Google was successful because they used OKRs. And someone said like, maybe they would have been more successful faster if they didn't have to deal with OKRs, right? But it feels like people are breaking things down to like the basics.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think first principles maybe became popular because of the Elon Musk effect, right? He's probably at least in my world, the guy who says that the most, or when people are talking about Elon Musk, they talk about him going back to first principle thinking. And I think the John Doerr book, I think the guy that popularized the OKR methodology was actually Andy Grove at Intel. Mm-hmm. And so I think your point is right about Google. I think in the right environment, and when you're talking about precision type work, like super precision type work, I remember touring an Intel plant one time, and I couldn't believe how intense it was in terms of just getting into the room where you actually work on a silicon chip, what you have to go through for the first hour and a half just to get in that room, because there's like zero. In that kind of work, maybe an OKR is great because it is so precise. But in a world where you're full of creativity and you need that creativity to really shine, OKRs are probably way too constraining. And I think people are trying to apply it to work where it doesn't need to be applied.
Yeah. It's interesting you were talking about your daughter. Like my dad had this saying, like, you just have to learn how to work hard and work all the time. And then when you get lucky, you know how to handle it.
I like that, actually.
like the idea is like, I mean, eventually everybody just gets lucky. Like it's just a pattern of things. Your day will come when you get lucky. But if you don't know how to do the work, then what? Then what do? You squander that one strike of lightning, you will squander it away.
That's right. The very first, the guy mentioned at the nearly to lead here, he used to say the harder I work, the luckier I get, right?
Yeah.
But the point you're making is you have to do the reps.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do the reps. I think that's another point about this. It's going to be a broad statement, but it certainly doesn't apply broadly. But sometimes the youth in our generation, I'm sure are people a little bit older than us were saying the same thing about us, but we just don't appreciate hard work, don't want to do hard work, don't want to do the reps. I want to be president tomorrow instead of, spending 10 years in order to prep myself to actually understand what it means to handle that type of responsibility. To your other point, right? It's like hard work is become sort of the cuss word of the world today. I don't want to do it. I remember sitting in a room with somebody who'd written AI leasing. He wrote a program for AI leasing. And he led by saying, I'm the laziest person in the world. And I thought, well, certainly he did a lot of hard work to write the AI to actually produce the leasing product that he had, but it just doesn't, he wants to be served, right? He doesn't want to.
Yeah, no, I think there's different. I mean, I am a big fan. Like I automate so many things in my work life and personal life, but I always find that it gives me space to do more things. It's not like, it's like, I'm still going to work 12 hours a day. That's just how that is. And I'm still going to work, 4 hours from 7 p.m. till 11 p.m. every Sunday night. I will be working because that's my pattern of work. And if I can automate something, it doesn't mean I'm like not gonna to work those hours. I'm just gonna do that much more. But they always say that like the previous generation never has anything positive to say about the next generation. I mean, so it's like
that's right.
But I do think how people think about like I will tell you, there are a lot of I think it's easy to like sample out the kids that quote unquote that aren't working hard. I think we get in our head that like, oh, this generation doesn't want to work as hard. And then we kind of, from a pattern perspective, we seek out affirmation because I will say, like, I still teach some at Georgia Tech and I see some of those kids down there, they are just grinding it out. I mean, they are not sleeping. I was talking to some of the leadership at Georgia Tech and they're like, oh, well, we have these substance abuse problems. And I'm like, but the kids are smoking weed. I mean, all college kids smoke weed. Like, what's the problem? He's like, no, Adderall. Like these kids are just like, taking so much Adderall because they just want, they want that edge. They don't want to sleep. They want to keep working. I was like, interesting. So yeah, I think there is like this generational thing. Like the generation before us thought we're lazy too. And then, they point to the 10 people, in their family that are super lazy and bums. And I'm like, every family has a couple of bums and that will never change. And the generations before, but I think we try to like go seek out the data points to make our point.
I think that is true. That is an absolutely fair statement to make. If I could key off one thing that you just said with regard to the grinding nonstop, I think there is something that is presenting itself in the world today that is of concern and something we certainly need to be, as a business organization, mindful of, and to the extent that we can help, we should, and that's mental health. I think, and certainly COVID has sort of exacerbated a lot of this type of mental health, but I think I just get nervous that all of our generations are just taxed to the max these days, and so fasting on the news or taking a fast from the news, we've got to be mindful about what we allow in here, in the consumption that we make, the time and effort that we give to our work, and not getting time out for recreation or recreation, right? Or getting out into the woods. And I think there's this great saying, or not saying, it's a word, ikigai, I think is how you say it. It's a Japanese forest bathing, getting out into the woods. And sounds weird, but I know every time I hike, I feel amazing. There's something that feeds me in that space, but helping our team members in the work world, and certainly our family members, remember that you need to get out and take care of yourself.
Yeah, no, look, I think, I've had a lot of conversations about like mental health, and like it's just health. And
Mhm.
if we can have more open conversations about, like, hey, I need to call in sick because I got the flu, like we're not allowed to say anything about our mental health. Like, hey, I need to call in sick because of whatever's going, like you're not allowed to say that, right? That's
Right.
not the same. So how we work on that. And I do think it's interesting that when you look at, I mean, I look at my own kids and how they were exposed to so many like adult themes at such a young age. I grew up like, if my dad would make me watch the news with him and watch Walter Cronkite, kind of thing, right? And I was like, oh, Dad, I don't want to watch the news. But that was like maybe 20 minutes of news, and I got the highlights. And I kind of didn't care.
Mhm.
And I think now we have on-demand news, and that means everyone's consuming things that may or may not be important to them.
Right.
But it can definitely create a lot of anxiety around, in my community, a lot around like kind of some of the racial stuff that happens. It's like
Right.
all of a sudden, like, oh, okay. I was talking to some, it's so funny. I was talking to some Vietnamese friends, and they were like, yeah, it was really scary for us for a while, during the pandemic, because one, people don't know the difference between the Chinese and Vietnamese.
Mm.
And all of a sudden we're getting looks, right? We're getting looks. And
Right.
so I think that there's definitely like a lot of overexposure to adult themes at a very young age. It's not that kids shouldn't be informed about what's going on, but I think it's just they're getting the raw, meant for adults news at 11. At 11 years old, they hear about shootings, and I mean, it's happening in the world, but I think there's a little bit that says, of course, kids are anxious if they're, if they watch the news every day or look at social media from age 10. The world's falling apart, right? If that's
Right. If that's all you're putting in here, right? It's because it's all, not all of it, but the lion's share of it is sensationalized for clicking, right, and viewing and keeping you engaged in the content, and so you don't. It's interesting. It's part and parcel of the reason I read books instead of blog posts, or if I read online content, it's usually medium content, right? It's stuff that's real long form because it's much more thoughtful and intentional in terms of what it's trying to communicate, as opposed to clicky stuff that you see
yeah.
on Facebook.
It was funny. I wrote a textbook about 10 years ago,
I
and
read that book.
what I was like writing it, I was being coached by my publisher, and they said, look, the way academic writing works is you need to be cited, and you don't get cited unless you're the person that's really been the first mover and innovated a whole new thing. If you're that person, that's fine. But if you're not, there's no benefit in agreeing with the people that came before you,
Yeah.
because you'll never be cited. They'll always cite the person that first innovated it. So you're better off like being contrarian so that you get cited. So when someone cites, Steve Smith said X, Y, and Z, but Joe Bob said the exact opposite. And then so you get cited for being it. And you learn this whole academic environment that a lot of researchers don't actually believe in the words they're saying, but they write them in a way so they can get cited.
Interesting.
And that's a lot of, if you look at that principle, that's what a lot of what you see online is. There's no point in me writing a blog post to agree with you. That doesn't get me clicks and comments and everything. I need to write something that absolutely I disagree with you just to get a rise. Even if I do.
Even if you don't believe it. Yeah.
Right. Right. So what do you guys shifted into some hospitality stuff? Like, how are you seeing that? I mean, how are you seeing that market with everything, as we're rebooting the economy, so to speak?
So I think in the early innings, we were very bullish. We thought the impact of COVID would be much more dramatic in the hotel space than it has been. I think that certainly the funding mechanisms for hotels allowed for owners to hold on. And so some of the forbearance that exists in that space has allowed hotel owners to live on to another day. I think the way we're thinking about this is that as the world starts to present its sort of new version of itself, the travel industry is still going to be exposed in, Zoom and Teams and other sort of communication mechanisms are going to keep people. I mean, you traveled for the first time in 2 years, right? But I think a lot of people are going to just define a new way of working that is going to keep some of that corporate travel out of the ecosystem. Certainly the leisure travel will be there. But we think there's going to be a sort of a delayed impact to the hotel space. So there will be buying opportunities. We have 3 that we've purchased. We have 7 others that are under contract. We think that's going to accelerate in the first quarter of next year as hotel buying goes. It's kind of the spring where you see the real activity, or at least that's what I've come to know. So I think we're going to be buyers of hotels for at least the next 24 to 36 months. We think somewhere in that 24 to 36 month window, something's going to happen in the multifamily space because the pricing is, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. I saw a deal the other day that traded for a 1 cap or in the 1 cap area. That makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
And so
I was talking to a group this morning and we're talking about NFTs, right? NFTs are all about perceived value. A signed Michael Jordan shirt jersey is still a $20 jersey, right, but it may sell for $3,000. And then you look at things that are productive assets, like a piece of real estate property. And now what you're seeing is this speculative angle that's being put on top of a productive resource, right? So we're adding speculation on top of a productive resource. And, the person made a comment to me. They said, look, that's because in America, we want to trade things constantly. Like we're constantly trading these assets. And every time you trade an asset, you're adding, there's a bunch of brokers in between that have to get paid, right? There's all these people in between that have to get paid, both on the financing and the transaction and all this other stuff. So you're essentially inflating the asset by all these, you're automatically, after you pay everyone, it has to be worth, X plus.
That's right.
And that a lot of the need to pay more or for assets to get expensive is if you transact, someone said in multifamily, it's like every 18 months.
That's roughly right. Yes.
So every 18, and if you look at the total transaction costs of buying and selling a property and everyone involved, it's another, 10% maybe?
I would say that's probably right.
So every 18 months, we're adding 10% of cost to an asset that's actually kind of made up.
That's right.
It's actually made up. So people can say, oh, I don't understand NFTs. And I'm like, well, look at multifamily.
Right. It's the tangible version of that.
Right. So, what I was told was like, well, when the financing stops existing or interest rates move, that's when the music stops.
That's right. And so this will be, when that happens, that'll be my 4th business cycle, or at least since I've been alive, the 4th one that I can remember. And certainly I think that regulation that was put in 07, 08 is going to sort of mitigate a huge crisis, but you just can't, even though we have demographics that line up, right? I think we're underbuilding in America, but even though those demographics line up, at some point the pricing, the math doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work anymore. And that day of reckoning will come. And when it does, those prudent individuals, prudent investors that have been sitting on the sidelines, or they have some capital active, but they have powder on the sidelines, are gonna, you're gonna sort of back the truck up and load them up.
Yeah, I talked to a group the other day, blew me away, multifamily developer owner. Their minimum hold period is 10 years.
10 years.
And I was like, who are you? What are you, European? Like, what's going on here? And they said, look, what we have figured out is trading in and out. At the end of the day, if we just hold for a period, what we net is actually better than trading in and out. And we actually build equity in the property, and we're less dependent on outside capital. And I was like, interesting, right?
Yeah, I can. So I have two firms, two examples like that: Mills Properties in St. Louis and Widener Properties in Washington. They have that same business model, and I think provided you're putting capital back into the property in the way of roofs and windows and things that wear down and break over time, that's the right model. It's get a good management component in place, and you just take care of the assets. You serve your customer. You get good business partners to help you along the way, and you'll reward those investors. May not make these huge, whatever, 2-3x pops, but they're going to make a lot of money over time.
Right. And I think that was their point. They were like, our investors like getting a check every month.
That's right.
And they get a check every month, and they're dentists and doctors and retirees, and they're more than happy to get that check every month. And they know they can count on it for 10 years.
That's right.
And there's a lot of value in that. And so they were talking though, there's also a lot of pressure though, because they're looking around and, oh, this guy did this and that guy did that. And they're like, well, we can sit there and just keep trading. The only guys that make money, only guys making money are the brokers, really.
Yeah, that's right. I think it comes back to, there's a reason why Warren Buffett is one of the, right? It's just, you understand that time is your friend, right? You buy right. You let time be your friend. Mm-hmm. You don't run after the next shiny thing that gives you a potential pop. You're just patient.
Yeah.
It seems like patient money wins over time.
Yeah, I would agree. Although I'm a very impatient person. Anything else you want to chat about? We're running up on time.
No, I listen, I just take this last few minutes just to thank you. I think what you're doing out in the venture capital space, I know we've talked in different forums. I love it. I think it's interesting. I remember the first time, actually, it was the second time I met you. It was you had a Metallica shirt on. And I'm like a big fan of Metallica. I'm like, this is my kind of venture capital guy. It's awesome. But that aside, I just think what you're doing out there in the world, especially as it relates to Georgia Tech and in teaching and mentoring and coaching, and certainly being a part of that incubator that they have at the university, is just, I love that. And I really applaud you for that and recognize you for that. It's giving back to the community that I think has helped you build your business and continues to help you build your business is the right way to do business. And I just applaud you for it.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. And thanks for taking the time. This was great. This is like just me and you chatting. It's great.
I love it. Anytime.
Other people are going to watch this too.
No. Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right. I'll talk to you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, bye.
Bye now.